how do we communicate a boundary without making it awkward and weird?
Yeah. This is a really good question because people worry about awkwardness like this all the time.
Oh, we're all terrified of offending people.
And they're so worried about it that they actually prevent themselves from having conversations because they're worried that the awkwardness will come up, or they're worried about how the conversation is going to end. So the best thing we can do is to just, again, sort of share something that's authentic about ourselves and say, you seem really passionate about politics. I'm feeling like I'm feeling like my person lost, and I'm mourning that. And if you don't mind, I just want to, maybe we can talk about sports instead, depending on who you're rooting for.
Yeah,
because this is such a hard topic for me. I'm still working through it. Is that okay? Right. So two things has happened there. Number one, instead of telling you you're a jerk, you're wrong, you're bringing up stuff, I disagree with you. You know that I disagree with you, but I'm saying I'm just going to tell you about my experience. I'm going to say something about what I'm feeling, not a comment about you. And number two, I'm going to ask you for permission. Is it okay if we talk about sports instead? Just because like this is weighing on my soul right now and I'm trying to deal with it. When I ask you for permission, suddenly you say, oh yeah, sure, that's fine. I got no problem with that.
It's the airplane seat again, isn't it?
It's the airplane seat. Exactly. Like when I break through and I say, hey, look, do you mind if we talk about something else? Now, very often the awkwardness that people worry about is the opposite direction. My dad passed away about 7 years ago. We're actually coming up on his birthday. And when I went home for the funeral, I came back to work afterwards and people were like, where were you last week? And I said, oh, my dad passed away. I was at his funeral. And everyone would say basically some version of, oh, my condolences. I'm so sorry. And then they would move on to other stuff because they didn't know what to say. They were worried about saying the wrong thing. They were worried about it being awkward. But like I had just been thinking for the last week all about my dad. Like this is like the biggest thing in my life. If someone had said, what was your dad like? Like, tell me about him. I would have loved that, right? It would have felt like such a gift for someone to say like, tell me about the eulogies. What did people say about him? What was amazing? So oftentimes we avoid the conversation not only because we're worried about something we don't want to talk about, we avoid the conversation because we are worried that we will talk about something and we don't know how to handle it. And the answer is, the best thing we can do is to ask that deep question, to say, what was your dad like? And if they don't want to tell you what their dad was like, they'll be like, oh, he was wonderful. He was a wonderful guy.
Is it because we're afraid of being rejected on some level? Or what is that fear there might be a couple fears that's at the root of asking that question?
Yeah.
I mean, you shared, okay, well, we're worried about but what's another level below that, why we're so reticent to do that?
So researchers have looked at this a lot, and what's happening is basically a misforecast of what's going to happen. So I give a lot of speeches where I talk about communication. And what I do in the speech is, and this is modeled after some work that was done by a professor at University of Chicago, is I say, in 30 minutes, I'm going to ask you to turn to the person next to you and ask and answer one question. And that question is, when is the last time you cried in front of another person? And then I ask, who's excited about this? And no hands go up, right? Nobody wants to do this. They're at a conference. They're at a trade show.
Yes.
And here I am telling them they're going to have a therapy session with the person next to them.
Right.
They think it's a terrible idea. But then I explain about deep questions and about looping for understanding and how communication works and the 3 types of conversations. And what I say is, all of you think that conversation is going to go terribly. So let's go ahead and try it. Let's do it. We do the experiment, right? People talk 2 minutes per person. And then I ask them, raise your hand if that conversation went better than you thought it would. And every single hand in the room goes up. It was a great conversation. People sometimes say it was the best conversation they've had in the last week. People will hug each other. Sometimes people will start tearing up. There's a lot of laughter because they're telling funny stories. So what's happening there is that people are trying to forecast how awkward is this conversation going to be, and they're getting the forecast consistently wrong. And many of us do, right? Because we don't practice this. When someone says that they were at a funeral, we don't ask, oh, tell me about that person. What were they like? And the first time we do it, we realize, oh, my forecast of how that conversation was going to go was totally off. It went a lot better than I thought it was going to.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone in this room, everyone listening, they've had that experience where they were like, up in knots about a conversation, and then they had it, and afterwards they're like, oh, that went so much better than I thought it was going to. The lesson to learn there is we often misforecast how awkward it's going to be, how painful it's going to be, how bad it's going to be if we say the wrong thing. And if we learn that like that's a misforecast, it stops us from preventing ourselves from doing the right thing.
Wow. And it's a muscle, just like anything else.
Exactly.
Gotta wade in and ask the question.
Exactly.
Wow.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So what's the toughest conversation you've had in the last year?
With my oldest son.
Yeah.
And he just needed to air some grievances. And he was going to college. I've since learned, of course, I consider myself an amateur psychologist in the work that I do. And so I learned from different sources that all kids that go from high school to college, whether it be a boy or girl, despite their situation, they essentially begin to psychologically break up with their parents.
That's interesting.
Sometimes they're friends. In other words, they got some anxiety about this new world. They know it's normal. They may be equally excited and also scared.
Yeah.
And so what they do is they know how hard it's going to be. And so they begin to put up boundaries and push away and sometimes hurt people close to them. They don't know what they're doing.
Right.
Their frontal lobe, of course, is still not developed.
Yeah.
I'm 50. I'm not sure mine is either. But it was a hard conversation, and he just shared a lot of stuff. And it was hard to sit there, but I also knew he needed it.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't a mean-spirited thing.
Right.
I could sense it. It was emotional. It was an emotional conversation. But it was very hard to sit there and let him get that out.
Yeah.
It's your boy.
Yeah. No,
So I mean, you asked me, that's the one. I mean, it rocked my world.
it hasn't been since then. Did that conversation?
Oh, it's been a healing process.
Yeah.
It's it's funny how when they go away, this will encourage you. When they go away, they realize how good it actually is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When I was young, I thought my dad was real dumb, but he got smarter as I got older. It really.
It's funny. You probably heard this, but Mark Twain famously said, he used to talk about the 18-year-old who went off and came back 4 years later, and he couldn't believe how much his dad had learned in that time. I mean, that's classic Mark Twain.
Totally works.
But that's great.